Hello, vinyl community and Emerson, Lake and Palmer fans and Carl Palmer fans. This is Graham Allen, and today this is part 2 of Drum Crazy. In part 1, we looked at Carl's tour of America with the Crazy World of Arthur Brown and forming Atomic Rooster with Vincent Crane, and we talked about his style really coming. Being very immediate on the Atomic Rooster album. Fast, speedy snare playing, some restrained playing on a track called Winter with glockenspiel, very restrained. A drum solo, a very fast, fiery, snare-centric drum solo. And some interesting bass drum work, very quick bass drum work. So for a 19, 20-year-old, a very audacious debut recording, really. There was some earlier stuff, King Bees, singles, that sort of stuff with the Craig, but I want to focus really on Emerson, Lake and Palmer and maybe talk a little bit about after Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So I just want to read a quote from a book called The A to Z of Rock Drummers. This came out in the early 80s by a guy called Harry Shapiro, and it's worth mentioning pre-internet. It was quite hard to get information on things like drummers' recordings or drummers' techniques, or people even talking about the setup of drum kits by famous drummers. So this was a bit of a Bible for most drummers that were fans of rock music in the early 80s. And I just want to read from this, the quote about Carl Palmer, the section on Carl Palmer. So it says, a superlative percussionist whose speed, invention and dexterity with Emerson, Lake and Palmer put him in the front rank of world drumming. So that's quite a quote, isn't it? Speed, invention and dexterity, a superlative percussionist. And then at the end, where they recommend some listening, we've got the debut album, which of course we're going to talk about today, and Brainside Surgery, which I'm probably going to talk about in the next episode. It says ELP 1970 and Brainside Surgery are Palmer's best statements. His drumming on the debut album can only be described as frightening. Again, what a quote. This is the album. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's debut album. Rather than going through all the tracks, I'm going to focus on Carl really, because so often, I'm sure everyone watching this people will rank the albums or go through the tracks. And what I want to talk about is, first of all, I think he stamps himself all over the album, and he stamps himself from the opening track, which is The Barbarian. It's again, I keep using the word fiery, but it's really in your face. The tempo is up, and in a way, he contributes everything in that one track. He switches to brushes halfway through the track after a very bombastic start, lots of crashes on the cymbals, and then there's this beautiful piano interlude, where Carl plays brushes at quick pace, but in a very subtle way. So it immediately sets him out as a kind of slightly superior player to the notion of the pounding rock drummer that was around at that time. On the outro, he does something which I think he's just superb at, which is these drum fills, which are taken at breakneck speed. And I would mention, he does something which I think is a bit unique to him. He goes for these pretty audacious single bass drum speedy fills, where he'll just hammer the bass drum a number of times. He does it on Trilogy. I'm going to talk a bit about that. It's just a very audacious sort of thing, and he kind of hammers the bass drum to great effect. So really superb album. There's other great moments on here, such as his orchestral touches on Take a Pebble, very restrained, bell of the cymbal, subtle, just assisting the track, not getting in the way. Knife edge, we've got sort of almost doom metal, a bit like Atomic Rooster. Very heavy organ sound. Again, Carl's really good on that, very orchestrated playing. And he contributes some quite unique fills again in that track about halfway through. You just don't really hear similar fills, other people playing that. There's some really good use of sort of open hi-hat in one of the fills. Side 2, I mentioned the Three Fates, which is a Keith Emerson basically solo showcase, but I mention it for some great jazzy playing by Carl in the piano trio, and something he does really, which was I think shown to him by Buddy Rich, is a one-handed drum roll. He calls it the paintbrush technique, and it's where he fans the stick across the snare with his left hand, striking the drum head sort of forwards and backwards, get it up to speed, and it has this single stroke roll feel to it. People now play one-handed drum rolls, I should say, not single stroke rolls. They play them by hitting the edge of the rim of the snare and the center of the snare head and kind of bounce it up and down. But I think there's something different about the sound on this track with this kind of fanning paintbrush motion. Then we have Carl's track, Tank, which I think is a sensational track. It has a kind of Frank Zappa feel to it. He's got this unusual groove that he sets up again, which is a bit similar to Decline and Fall on the Atomic Rooster album. A very speedy kind of feel to it. He plays a press roll ongoing within the rhythm. And it's just one of those things to kind of put in the speed roll that he's doing in between beats. It's kind of phenomenal that it can fit in those notes. It then kicks into a very fast drum solo. He introduces the gongs, which he still plays now, and the gongs are used to great effect within this solo. And then there's an amazing sort of Frank Zappa-esque outro, a classic Carl Palmer rhythm that he sets up using flams on the snare, stomping bass drum, I think influenced a little bit by Keith Moon, a sort of stomping sound. And then very tender playing on Lucky Man, grooving, this iconic Moog solo. So just to sort of sum him up on here, he's playing a small kit, he's playing a Gretsch kit with a hanging tom and probably 2 floor toms, snare drum, sorted cymbals, china cymbals, the gongs of course, but he's not got into this run round the kit, the large kit that would come a little bit later, which was really part of his signature sound or a signature fill for Carl. But very creative on a small kit and very, very tight, fast on the snare, what I call accelerated roll playing. So really an ability to kind of play fast and then kick in the turbo to kind of speed it up. So that's the first album. The second album that Emerson, Lake and Palmer recorded was Tarkus, and I'm going to mention this. This, I think, I wonder if this is his most memorable beat, really, in a way. When people talk about memorable drum beats, and we think of, John Bonham, all sorts of people, When the Levee Breaks. I think Tarkus, the Tarkus Suite, the eruption rhythm, which is in 10/8 and is at a kind of a rattling speed. It sort of mirrors Keith Emerson's Left Hand, and of course they came up with it because Carl was talking about this 5/4 10/8 rhythm, and Keith Emerson said, well, I've been working on a sort of an ostinato on my left hand in a similar time signature. So they kind of put them together, and people will know they came up with this kind of very driving 10/8 rhythm. Interestingly, other people have, covered Tarkus and played it quite differently, that they've kind of made it more sparse, perhaps more groove orientated. I think of it quite machine gun-like with Carl. So I think it's interesting because you've got this sort of mechanical creature, a kind of tank really, with a creature as well. And I think his drum rhythm mirrors that. It's quite machine gun-like. It's breakneck speed, and of course live, he played it even faster. Some people thought that it lost a bit by the extra pacing, but certainly on the live album, Welcome Back My Friends, Tarkus is played at a killer speed. And I think his work rate live and to keep up this rhythm over a lot of this piece is quite incredible. He's still on a small kit on this. It's beautifully recorded. You can miss a bit of the speed of the bass drum work in this 10/8 rhythm on this album. And on side 2 is a track called Bitches Crystal, which again is a very speedy track. It's a kind of waltz time, so a 6/8 time. It's very Carl in that the left hand is dancing around on the snare drum, speedy cymbal work, and it propels the track. I'm not going to talk too much about other tracks on this album. Again, just to say, he introduces the gongs to dramatic effect in Tarkus when there's this pause and then the eruption rhythm comes back. The dramatic use of the Peisty gongs, which he was using, gigantic gongs in the setup, bit unique really. He's playing traditional grip, which people will know. The left hand on the snare is played, it's a jazz grip as opposed to a kind of a rock grip or a matched grip. I always thought that marked him out a bit. It made it look really kind of cool. At this stage, his wrists were very, very whiplash. You can see some footage from Zurich. Very whiplash wrists. The solo in particular, towards the end, people will know he kind of dramatically builds up the speed, probably using 5-stroke rolls at the end with alternate kind of accents on the cymbals for this kind of wave effect, with the cymbals going as well on each of the accented beats on the 5. But he also uses what I think might be a 6-stroke roll, single stroke roll, but accenting on the 5 and the 6. So it gives this whipping sound where you've got a pulsating snare roll and then you've got these 2 accents coming at the end, and people will know it. It's very, very dramatic when you see it live. I've been with people that don't know he's playing that well, and I think there's something really climactic about the end of his drum solos, that it's this accelerated speed at the end, the turbo kicking in, and it was just so dramatic back then. There were long drum solos from other people, of course, but quite often they didn't quite have that climax. And I think he is no doubt influenced by Buddy Rich with these sort of climaxes to the playing. I'm actually going to leave it at that for now because I want to break this video up a bit, and we've got Tarkus and Emerson, Lake and Palmer there, and I'd ask people to check them out. He's bombastic. He's also subtle in some of the tracks as well, using bells of cymbals, that sort of stuff, but really comes out as a unique voice. He was winning loads of polls at that point, understandably. And then we're going to move on to a live album, Pictures and Exhibition, but also Trilogy, where I think he actually reined it back quite a bit, but also starts using a larger kit. And with Brain Salad Surgery, which again is seen as one of his key essential recordings, as mentioned in the book. And of course, we will be talking about his use of electronic percussion. So I hope you've enjoyed that. A bit of a whistle-stop tour of these 2 albums, and he's playing. That's Carl Palmer Drum Crazy Part 2, and see you soon for Part 3.